to the August 12th, 2014 regular meeting of the Troy Planning Commission. Copies of the agenda for tonight's meeting are available at the entrance to the room. Additionally, the agendas and minutes of prior meetings are available on the city's website. The meeting will be conducted in accordance with the agenda as presented or amended by the Planning Commission. The roles and responsibilities of the Planning Commission are outlined on the reverse side of tonight's agenda. State law establishes planning commissions. The commission is comprised of 9 members, all of whom have volunteered to serve. Members are appointed by the mayor and confirmed by city council. The other individuals seated at the table this evening are representatives of the city's planning department, the city's attorney's office, and the city's planning consultant, Carlisle Wortman Associates. If you wish to address the Planning Commission, please come forward when recognized and provide your name and address on the sign-in sheet. Please begin your remarks by stating your name for the benefit of the commissioners. All remarks are to be addressed to the Planning Commission and not to anyone else in the room. At this time, I ask that all cell phones, Blackberries, PDAs, or any other devices that might disrupt this meeting please either be placed in silent mode or be turned off. Ms. Zarnicki, the roll, or is it you? Brett?
Ms. Cruz.
Here.
Mr. Edmonds.
Here.
Mr. Gottlieb.
Here.
Mr. Hudson.
Here.
Mr. Krent.
Here.
Mr. Senzika.
Here.
Mr. Shepke.
Here.
Mr. Stratt.
Here.
Mr. Tagle.
Here.
Next item is the approval of the agenda. Could I have a motion, please? Yes, Mr. Gottlieb, and seconded by Mr. Tagle.
Motion to approve the agenda.
Mr. Edmonds.
Yes.
Mr. Gottlieb.
Yes.
Mr. Hudson.
Yes.
Mr. Krent.
Yes.
Mr. Senzika.
Yes.
Mr. Shepke.
Yes.
Mr. Stratt.
Yes.
Mr. Tagle.
Yes.
Ms. Cruz.
Third is the minutes of the July 22nd, 2014 Planning Commission Special Study Meeting. Is there a motion or any comments or revisions? Motion by Mr. Stratt to approve, seconded by Mr. Shepke.
Mr. Gottlieb.
Yes.
Mr. Hudson.
Yes.
Mr. Krent.
Yes.
Mr. Senzika.
Yes.
Mr. Shepke.
Yes.
Mr. Stratt.
Yes.
Mr. Tagle.
Yes.
Ms. Cruz.
Yes.
Mr. Edmonds.
Yes. Agenda item 4 is public comment for items that are not on the agenda. Seeing no one in the audience, we'll move on to number 5, preliminary site plan review. Planned unit development application, file number PUD 008-A. Proposed Big Beaver Place, north side of Big Beaver, east of John R., section 24, currently zoned PUD number 8, planned unit development number 8, district. Who's going to begin with this?
We're going to kind of tag team this and just, we're not actually going to, we're not seeking action this evening. It's more of a study item-esque, so we'll be kind of
Okay, great.
going back and forth.
Good evening to the Planning Commission. I hope everyone brought a sweater. It's freezing in here. I do want to note for those listening, watching at home, the applicant's not currently in attendance yet. We will acknowledge if they do come into attendance, just so everyone at home does know that. So the applicant has submitted a preliminary development plan for a mixed-use PUD on Big Beaver. And before I go into the site details of the plan, I just want to reiterate to the Planning Commission the process under which a PUD is adopted, because I know it's been a while before a PUD has been in front of the Planning Commission. It's a three-step process, and the first step is the approval of a concept development plan. The name is what it suggests. It's simply a concept for the development of a parcel, includes uses and includes unit numbers, etc. But it's really just a preliminary layout of a site. Once the concept development plan is approved by the City Council, the property is then rezoned. And the applicant moves on to the second step in the process, which is the submittal of a preliminary development plan. A preliminary development plan is similar to a preliminary site plan, and it's actually reviewed under the same article of the zoning ordinance as a preliminary site plan. The preliminary site plan must be in compliance with the concept development plan, but what compliance means really is really a determination by the Planning Commission. And so that's something that we need to discuss tonight, is whether or not the preliminary plan submitted by the applicant is consistent with the concept development plan. The Planning Commission makes a recommendation on the preliminary development plan, and the recommendation goes to City Council for ultimate approval. After the preliminary development plan, we move to step 3, and step 3 is a final site plan, which essentially is the final development plan. That plan is approved administratively. So as of this point, the only Planning Commission consideration now is the preliminary development plan, which then ultimately goes to City Council. So as noted in our report, the applicant has submitted a preliminary development plan, which includes 3 retail buildings, one of which building will be a drive-through use. The total building, retail building square footage is approximately 17,000 square feet. In addition, they are proposing 20 residential units. These are clustered into 2 building clusters of 5 units each. 2 building clusters really of 10 residential units. This differs from the concept plan that was approved in the last plan that the Planning Commission last reviewed a few months ago. These are now perpendicular to Big Beaver. The ones before were really parallel to Big Beaver. So that's another point of discussion tonight with the Planning Commission. In addition, similar site amenities have been approved, and this includes a pedestrian plaza, pedestrian access from Big Beaver, stormwater features, and outdoor seating. Though we find that the site plan has changed, and we have noted some issues with the site plan, we do find for the most part this is consistent with some changes to the site plan for the concept development plan. However, as I said, it's ultimately the determination of the Planning Commission regarding the consistency of the 2 plans. In regards to the site plan itself, the Planning Commission did review a plan similar to this a few months ago. The major issue at that point was the layout of the residential as well as access from Big Beaver. The access with Big Beaver has been clarified with the Road Commission, and they have actually signed off on the proposed access point. We have very few concerns with the commercial development as laid out. Most of our concerns is in regards to the residential layout and the residential development, and so I'll spend more time focusing on that than anything else. Our first point of consideration for the Planning Commission and the applicant is that they are providing a pedestrian spine that runs in between the retail buildings. It's buffered with outdoor seating and other amenities, and then it dead ends really into a stormwater feature on the back end of the site in between the residential buildings. That also includes a gazebo/deck area. We have asked the applicant to consider alternatives for this location of this feature, or if they are going to keep it, to include some more details about what's being proposed. There's no indication if this is going to be a dry pond, a wet pond, what types of plantings are going to be located in it, what the gazebo or deck's going to look like, and how it's actually going to function. In addition, they've shown a designated play area in the back. Again, we have questions about what the play area is going to entail, and we asked for more details. If this is a wet detention facility, what's the grading between the wet area and the play area? What's going to be in the play area? Does it have to require to be fenced? Just some details to work through that the applicant should consider. The second issue is in the layout that's provided by the applicant, and most significantly the buffer that's provided by the applicant. Along the rear property line, they're only providing a 10-foot buffer for the buildings themselves and a 2 to 3 foot buffer for the turnaround at the end of those driveways. The approved concept development plan had a 40-foot buffer in the rear, so this application should, well, maybe not be 40 feet. It should be more consistent with 40 feet than the 10 feet. We don't find that 10 feet is significant enough for the residential properties behind this development. Our third issue is in regards to the submittal requirements of information that were not provided by the applicant, and they are deficient in a number of items that are required as part of the preliminary development plan. This includes the submittal of a grading plan, a utility plan, parking calculations, landscape calculations, and a lighting plan. These are going to be required in order for the Planning Commission to take action on the item at a future date. The last item for consideration is the consistency of the residential development with the commercial development. We note that the residential development has changed architectural styles than what was previously reviewed, and there are some questions about the consistency of the architectural details of the residential as compared to the commercial component, and just for the Planning Commission to consider with those, how to make it more consistent and guide the applicant in a resubmittal. That concludes my my report. I'm open for any questions, and we're looking forward for deliberation from the Planning Commission to assist the applicant in a resubmittal.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Carlisle? Yes, Mr.
Were all the planning commissioners able to look at the original approved CDP and compare what was like the original layout to this layout? It's the residential, excuse me, the commercial component is really quite consistent, quite similar, but the more dramatic differences in the layout and the design of the residential component to the north.
You're not talking about the 2007 plan?
Yes, I was talking about the two south. So what I've got on the screen here is the recent plan, which shows the orientation this way. The commercial component's got the drive-through to the west and the retail to the east along the frontage. Pretty consistent with what was approved before. Notice this is the wetland feature and gazebo and play area that Ben was talking about. So notice the orientation. You got a pot of 10, then the central area, then a pot of 10. And if you just humor me and let me go whip back here through this document and show you. This one. So here you see the orientation is a kind of a U shape with most of the units kind of along the back. Then you got this relatively linear water feature here serving as a buffer between the parking and the commercial. Notice the two commercial buildings and the drive-through, just again, pretty consistent with what was approved, but the orientation to the north in the residential component is different.
This is 2007.
2007, correct.
That was approved.
So although the ends have that north-south orientation, certainly along the north, where the lion's share of the units are along the north there.
And Mr. Savant, there is a 40-foot setback on the north side.
Correct.
Yes, Mr. Hudson.
You know, I've got two or three concerns, and rather than, my first reaction, of course, is that fairly compatible to the first plan we approved, but I've got some concerns about some of the details of this. The first is they have configured the residential perpendicular instead of horizontal. But they've increased it from 2 stories to 3 stories. And, you know, I can live with 2 stories along there, but you've got some residential neighborhoods, depending how you configure it to the east or west or north. And I'm concerned that, you know, 2 stories you might be able to get away with, but 3 stories, now you've got questions about those people to the east, if they're going to be perpendicular to Big Beaver, they may never see a sunset with a building that tall. If they were horizontal, you might be able to move it back 40 or 50 feet like we did with the Amber project down at the end of this street. But as a segue into that, I'm looking at the buffering with the landscaping requirement here, and our code provides evergreen trees, depending on the height, the distance between them. We've been doing that for 20 or 30 years because it provides great cover and it looks attractive. But what we're discovering now in talking to arborists is because after 20 or 30 years, it's almost one massive green wall. There's no air circulation in there. And these trees are developing a virus, something akin to the ash borer, where it affects the circulation of the trees, and the trees are dying. Although our code requires that, maybe if we're revising things, we ought to consider some other planting material in between evergreens so that if these trees do die in 10, 20, 30 years from now, there's still some cover by way of foliage to make up for that. I think we learned the hard way that when we put a whole bunch of ash trees in one subdivision, they all died. And those subdivisions which had a mixture of different species weren't too bad. The other is, if we've got a pond, wherever we locate this thing, is there going to be water in it all the time, or is it going to be a dry pasture and fill up when we get a rain like we had yesterday temporarily? Same with the bioswales. I'm concerned that maybe there be some moisture there while we're doing this. And the last thing is, I'm looking at this diagram. This looks very familiar as we looked at Carrabba and Fishbone and the bank where the Monarch used to be. That looks great in the plan, but if you walk through there, it's really narrow, it's unattractive, and it's dark. And I'm just wondering if we ought to take a little look at maybe changing it or widening it or doing something so it's not looking like we're going through a narrow tunnel.
Are you you're referring to this here, Mr.
Yes,
Hudson?
yes.
That's wider than the bank.
Well, the bank wasn't very wide to begin with, and I was kind of surprised. But be that as it may, those are my thoughts of the whole plan. And what they're worth, we want to consider them.
This goes back to the fact that it lacks dimension, so I can't even really tell you what that dimension
Yeah,
is.
it looks like what we saw originally on these others, and then when I drove by after it was done, I thought, holy cats. I mean, that was much narrower than it appeared on the plans.
Mr. Hudson, just for clarification, you referenced two different developments. I want to make sure that which one you were actually commenting on. The Bank Monarchs.
On both of them. The
Bo-
bank has got that real
Right.
narrow one.
Right.
And then Carrabba's with Fishbones has got a wider one.
But you still feel it's too narrow?
What's on the edge of being too narrow, but
Okay.
it certainly hasn't been finished with landscaping or the areas next to it. It still looks like a work in progress, and I would think after a year or so,
Just want to make sure which one you're talking about.
I'm kind of referencing both.
Okay.
Mr. Evans, you asked a question earlier. You asked if the setback was 40 feet. And I want to make sure I didn't mislead you with my answer. There is no required setback for a PUD, but I believe the setback that was agreed upon, negotiated in the CDP was 40 feet. So there's no actual required setback for a PUD, so.
Any other comments or questions? Or reactions?
Come on, somebody's got to disagree with me.
Well,
Mr. Stratt.
unfortunately, I'm not going to disagree with you. I support everything that you said, Mike. In addition, I look at this development, the architecture of this development, and it looks like there's two developments here as compared to what we saw back in 2007. The architecture of the residential component and of the commercial component had some similar massing features, had some similar materials on it, whereas this is a totally different venue from commercial to residential. And again, I just think looking closer at these setbacks, not only the rear yard is less than the side yard, the east yard in particular is much, much closer in this proposed plan than it was back in the 2007 plan. So I have a lot of issues with this. In addition to what Mike said, those are a couple of them, and I don't see that this plan in concept is close enough to the previously approved concept plan for me to support it.
Mr. Pratt?
I would agree with John. This residential layout is, first of all, impinging on the development, the homes to the north. That 10-foot plus the minor 2 or 3 foot on the pavement, that's really too tight. And again, it doesn't look like a cohesive project. It looks like two separate projects. And my other comment was about parking. So it looks like, it appears to me that the parking is all surrounding the retail stores, and you have to walk to your home. There's no parking in any of these homes, did I take it? Is that,
They're served with two-car garages.
there are 2-car garages in each of those?
Yes.
The three-story.
All right, never mind, okay. I just didn't see that. Okay.
Where do visitors park?
For the garage.
I'm sorry?
If you had a visitor,
Well, they would conceptually have to use shared parking with the commercial developments, and maybe they would be off hours with the commercial development, so it'd be night parking, weekend parking might be not as busy.
Mr. Tagle?
Well, I believe visitors could also park in front of the garage. I mean, there's a couple of spots, but again, there's no designated spots in addition to the approach to the garage.
Yes, Mr. Stratt.
I agree with the comments that was just made, or previous comments, all the comments that were previously made. My big concern is that they've got the two retention areas that are dry retention areas, whereas the previous one was a wet one, and they had features and they had a fountain as indicated on the drawing. This here, they've got, it looks like to me, the way that the drawing is done is two separate parcels. The way that the lot lines are indicated there, the bank is totally separate from the actual development. And I think that could have been brought in two separate issues rather than coming in with a PUD. But at any rate, based on that, I have concern the one retention area being behind the bank building. I assume that's what it is, the drive-through. Totally isolated, and then you've got the small one, which is really doing absolutely nothing. I mean, they're trying to make a play area out of it. They're not really creating any kind of a sculpture or anything out of the retention areas as a feature. It's just a plain Jane. They might as well put a fence all the way around it and call it the same as what we had before. I'm not very happy with the way that this, I agree with all the comments that were made prior to.
Brent, did the developer give any?
Ms. Cruz?
indication- I'm sorry?
I recognize you.
Could you tilt your microphone over? Yeah.
Did the developer give any indication as to why they had made the change with the residential portion of the PUD?
Do you recall? Yeah, I don't believe he did.
Two separate architects, that's why.
The only thing I'd lend is that in between, they were before the planning commission about 6 months ago before you came on, and the layout was parallel. The residential portion was parallel to Big Beaver, similar to what we saw, but there was only 10 units. In between that time and this submittal, we had asked the applicant actually to go and show those to some residential home builders to see if they're actually feasible to be built. After that point, they did come back and show us this layout. So it might have changed based on some of the feedback they actually heard from some of the builders out there. That's all we can say. I don't know.
Really quick, Mr. Chairman, we did provide notification of this meeting to the applicant in writing as per our policy. I don't know why they're not here, but these meetings are recorded and they're available to be viewed online. So I'm going to assume that even though they can't be here this evening, they will watch the recording. So this is still an opportunity to communicate with the applicant, and so I just want to.
Agree.
Yeah.
It does lack a lot in substance, though, when you don't have any back and forth. Mr. Senzica.
Well, I can't agree more with the commission than on their comments on the lack of creativity in the plan and the lack of detail. And what I'm really disappointed in is the wetlands, or the retention basins, and they just really didn't use a lot of thought in how they laid it out and how they designed it, with a playground within a basin which could flood during the storm event. And a gazebo in a dry basin. I think they need to look at the natural features, lay out the property in accordance with the natural features of the land, determine where the wetlands are, and try to identify, where the soils are conducive to building construction. And is it in the middle of the site or is it on the edge of the site? There's just so many unknowns there that I can't understand how a planner or an architect or whoever laid this out could have designed the homes and the basins without really looking at the natural features of the site and trying to make it uniform and consistent with what's on the property. So I really can't support this plan, and I think it just lacks creativity and it doesn't have a lot of forethought in how it's being laid out and designed.
Mr. Stratt.
Yeah, I guess I have a question for legal counsel. This entire parcel would be actually zoned for PUD, is that not correct, I guess?
It's currently zoned for PUD.
Right. But it's subdivided up, it appears to me that it's subdivided up based on the indication of the property lines into 3 totally separate parcels. Can that be financed separately? Is that the intent, and is that the rationale behind all this going together? Because the residential is certainly separate, the commercial is separate, and the bank or whatever the drive-through is going to be seems to be separate.
The most recent dialogue we had with the applicant indicated they wished to do the entire development in one phase.
Then why is the indication of all this divided up, I guess my question would be, you know, it seems kind of odd the way that it's laid out, and I guess legally, could they actually subdivide it up and have different financing and have different ownership?
I'd have to check the PUD agreement, but the basic layout conceptually with the commercial in front, with the drive-through to the to the west, and the other two buildings separate with integrated along. That's along Big Beaver with residential to the north. That is consistent with the approved PUD, at least conceptually. So that big picture, 10,000 yard view, it is consistent in terms of layout. The details are really what it gets down to.
Mr. Matsky.
I don't know how they're doing the financing, but I would note the concept approval has actually expired because it expired in 2012. So one thing that this applicant would need to do is reapply for conceptual approval and resubmit a brand new development agreement for approval. It could be done in conjunction with the second phase, but right now, even though it has been rezoned PUD, that rezoning technically is expired after 5 years. So,
Thank you, but I thought we had a PUD agreement in our packet for this.
that PUD agreement technically is expired because there was no further. We did not move to phase 2 within the 5-year requirement. So, I mean, they could still do this project. They would just have to apply for conceptual approval and resubmit a new PUD agreement or an amended agreement.
Mr. Sabato.
And I believe, and Alan will correct me if I'm wrong, I know, that what expiration of the PUD basically kind of triggers the city, if the city desires, to take action to rescind the PUD. The city has not taken action to physically rescind the PUD, so the PUD zoning is still in place because it hasn't been officially rescinded. It's got to be rescinded through public hearing by planning commission, and you've got to go through the steps for due process, but that has not occurred.
And that is correct. And of course, another option this city has is to rezone to some other zoning classification at this point as well.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Tagle.
I'm a little confused with the language. Has the PUD expired? And does the expiration come in, is it only valid if the city rescinds the PUD? Or is it valid, has it expired?
Mr.
I'll
Matsky.
respond. The way it has expired, but yes, there's the way our zoning ordinance reads, we have to take formal action once it has expired. So technically, it's still zoned PUD because we haven't taken any action, but they cannot move forward, though, on this conceptual approval unless they reapply or amend and get that approval through both a recommendation from this body as well as city council approval.
Okay, can I follow up?
Yes.
Okay, if that's the case, is it important that we are comparing this PUD in concept to the one that is expired?
Well, I would answer that at the time that it was approved, the planning commission and city council thought that was a good project.
Right.
So along came the recession, and so the question, so it is a valid question of the planning commission to ask, is this still a good project? I think there's a lot of merit in. I mean, my assumption is we thought it was a good idea in the past, so it's still a good idea. That's something we can certainly consider, but we have the benchmark of the approved PUD that on file to compare to. So that was our. I think that's a good way to start.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Stratt.
My recollection was that when this was originally approved, was before the zoning ordinance was actually changed so that we were actually PUD became a part of the land parcel as zoned. Before that, our PUDs were 1-year extensions, right?
Yes, but, no, they were, the PUD, the details of the, and again, Alan, feel free to jump in. The details of the, how long the PUD was valid for was written into the PUD agreement. And we, going off memory, we typically, it was 3 years or 5 years that we extended them.
Well, it seemed like the Monarch, I mean, we lost it right away. You know, if I recall correctly, it wasn't a 5-year extension on the Monarch, if I recall correctly.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going back quite a few years, but it seemed like, you know, when we originally started the PUD program, it was a lot different as far as a presentation form, et cetera.
We learned some valuable lessons on the Monarch
Yeah.
with exactly what you're talking about.
Right, well, there they spent $1 million in drawings on an if-come basis.
Yep.
I mean, now we've streamlined it, which makes a lot of sense. But again, you know, to me, it seems like here, there could be 3 different developers. And I think that was the motivation behind this whole new concept here, whereas the other was not that way. The original, old one was not that way, where this appears to be a residential developer, a commercial developer, and a lender, which would be a bank or something like that, which would be a different development in itself. Can it be sold individually, the parcels? Even though it's all zoned as a PUD, I guess that would be my question. Can that be financed separately?
And I don't know the answer to that, but what would that be a concern of yours? What would we be concerned about that?
Well, like previously mentioned, it seems like it's 3 different projects here. It's not a uniform PUD that we're looking for.
Well, I think that's a valid point, but for example, the Kilmer PUD has 2 developed entities to it. The front commercial portion was done by a totally separate entity than the residential portion in the rear. But once they have approved plans, they have to build to those plans, so it doesn't really matter who the ultimate owner is, because they have to build to approved plans. So I think for when we reviewed this, we had less concern about if there were 3 owners or not. We want to make sure that the plans that will be approved are ultimately consistent with each other.
I guess a follow-up on that, if I may, is that we're not seeing a cohesiveness of this, and that's
Agreed.
what I'm saying.
We
It
agree.
appears that was the driven, or the force behind this whole design.
We agree. And whether it's done by 1 owner, 5 owners, or 10 owners, they have approved plans that need to be consistent.
The question was, you know, why was it placed the way that it was? Well, I think that's rationale.
Okay.
If the developer were here, we'd be able to actually ask him, but, or her. But I really think, I wouldn't vote for this.
Mr. Edmonds, if I may.
Yes, Mr. Hudson.
May I inquire of legal counsel?
Yes.
Mr. Motsley, I think I understand what you're telling us tonight is that to go forward with this proposed project, we've got to find that it is similar in concept to the original PUD.
I think if you find that it's similar in concept to the original conceptual plan, it's my opinion, the applicant still has to apply for conceptual approval because, in my opinion, it's expired. But if you find that it is consistent, that reapplication could be a minor revision from the initial.
So in essence, if I can follow up,
Yes.
regardless of what we do, he's still going to have to come back, or the project's still going to have to come back, and we can inquire and make some decisions in our approval or disapproval regarding the details that we seem to be talking about right now with this whole project. Is it a condition that we've got to say, yeah, it's similar in concept, or if we say, no, it's not, would it have to come in through a different door to get approval for this project?
But just point of order, I think the Planning Commission at a previous meeting already said that it was consistent with the concept plan that was originally submitted.
Well, that was a study, wasn't it?
It was a
just
study
sort of,
meeting,
what do you
but-
think, guys? But there was no formal action taken, I don't believe.
That's true, there was no resolution, I agree.
No, I mean, we could change your mind, you know, like decide we're going to wear a hat on Tuesday instead of Wednesday.
Okay, okay.
I guess I see a lot of potential problems here, and I'm not so sure that this is the right thing to do without a lot of revisions.
Mr. Shepke?
Yes, thank you very much. I really don't like the architectural design of the units themselves. They're looked from the outside, from the residential area, and when they're looking at each other, I think it's nothing, it's pretty basic. And I really don't understand this stormwater detention feature. I don't understand how this play area, I wish there was a few more details on that, and this gazebo deck with a rail around it. This, to me, maybe I've just never seen anything like this. It doesn't look practical, and I don't like the layout. Compared to the first one, I like the parallel layout much better, so that's just my opinion. But I don't understand this water detention area. I think it looked really sharp before, and I really can't go along with it the way it is now. Thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. Godley?
Just to echo the sentiments of the fellow Planning Commission members, I would have to agree with everything that has been said up to this point. But if I understood it correctly, what the petitioner was looking for was they were seeking input from the Planning Commission. Is that accurate? And if I could make a suggestion that all of our questions, mine also, would be really well addressed if the petitioner were here to be able to have some interaction and maybe get some answers to those kinds of things. So I would encourage the individual seeking this to share some of their thoughts with us in person to be able to address these and other concerns. That's my suggestion.
Ms. Cruz, did you have any other comments?
No, I fully support all the comments that have already been made this evening, and well thought.
Mr.
Just had a question. Would it be appropriate to table this to a date certain to allow the developer to come in and answer any questions we have?
It's recommended that we take no action. It was already in the consultant's report that we not take it.
I still think before
Okay.
we respond to the developer, it would be nice to have him come here, and so we could ask him questions and have it addressed by him personally rather than through a videotape.
Well, given that there was no intent, and I indicated before the meeting that we weren't going to take any action, what I can do, Mr. Sanzik, is indicate to the applicant that they weren't present, and the Planning Commission, before they schedule a public hearing or move forward anyway, they do want to have dialogue with them, and you know, as per most negotiations, it does involve two-way communication.
I had one question about the retail building to the west. Is that actually two different entities? Is one like a drive-through restaurant and the other?
Yeah, I believe it's similar to the Starbucks Qdoba on 14 Mile, where the Starbucks has the drive-through component and the Qdoba does not.
Okay.
So in this instance, the drive-through component would be in the westerly portion of the retail, and the non-drive-through would be on the other half.
And one other question I had, now with what I call the vertical orientation of the residential units, where are the garage doors? Are they on the gazebo side or no?
They're interior facing the interior courtyard driveways.
Thank you. Any other further comments? Yes, Mr. Godley.
Yeah, I was reading somewhere in there earlier that they were 1,800 square feet. Is that the previous, or is that the current permutation of this? Or do you know what the square footage is of the residential units?
I don't, and I don't believe that calculation was provided by the applicant, but we can double check that.
I couldn't figure it out. I was just curious, and I thought I read it in there, so I'd like to know that.
Yes, Mr. Stratt.
Yeah, I think you mentioned that before, though, in your presentation, but I certainly would like to see samples of the materials and the colors that they're talking about using as well. I think that would be important. I'm somewhat pleased with the elevations, but I'm not totally sure.
Yeah, Yes, Mr. Krant.
Just a quick comment regarding the neighbors to the north, the residential, they're R1E, and I just looked up, their required rear yard setback is 35 feet. So I would at least say this new development should at least mimic the development to the north of 35 feet.
Those neighbors to the north are, again, just like these lots, extremely deep lots.
Yes.
Yeah, so, but I'm sure they always have the potential to be developed by something similar, assembly of properties and things like that. Mr. Senzika?
Well, again, I just want to make a point that there was no creativity at all in the layout of the residential buildings, in the wetlands and the detention areas. They could have used bioremediation, vegetated swales. There could have been a number of different methods used to make this a consistent plan, which they didn't even take any opportunity to do. And they have two separate features here that aren't even connected. And if you look at the general topography of the site, it's pretty flat. And I again, I was really surprised to see that. I thought there may have been some wetland features or some feature on the property that required them to do that. So I really would hope that they would be a little more creative and use some type of sustainable development especially with a playground within a retention basin. I think it's just poor judgment, and it's a great liability to any resident that would be on the site.
Agreed. One other question I had was the walkway between the retail section and the residential. Does that go right through the parking lot? And is it just what, like a raised sidewalk or something, or?
Again, the details about what that was not provided. It does basically bifurcate the parking lot and go straight through, whether it's some raised or whether it's got a different material type or color, or it was not indicated.
I'm just wondering if I were a resident there and I wanted to go to the retail portion by walking, which is the advantage of the whole PUD here, would I have to walk through the gazebo first to get to the walkway to go over to there? Or it doesn't show a walkway around the gazebo that I can see, but maybe it is there. Maybe it's just
It's in front of
I think there's a sidewalk that, there looks like there's
oh, it's in front.
yeah,
Okay.
there's a,
not enough detail.
So, if I may, Mr. Chairman, could I make a motion that we delay further review of this until some specific date certain, and allow the developer to come and address the concerns of the planning commission? I don't know if you propose a date, I would make that motion.
I'll second that.
Motion by Mr. Senzika and seconded by Mr. Stratt. Further discussion on the motion?
I didn't make a date certain, but if,
I know, I think with tabling, you have to have a date certain. Am I
Or
correct?
go ahead, Al.
It's always best if you have a date certain, but it's not absolutely necessary.
Could we, in the interest of encouraging the applicant to move along rather than specify date certain, can we say until such time that the applicant has addressed the concerns indicated by the Planning Commission this evening and submitted, additional information? Can we do something like that?
I would agree with that, yes.
Okay.
Are you okay with that, Mr. Stratt? Further discussion? The motion, please.
I'm sorry. Who seconded, Mr. Chair? Was that Mr. Stratt?
Mr. Stratt.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Krent?
Yes.
Mr. Senzika?
Yes.
Mr. Shepke?
Yes.
Mr. Stratt?
Yes.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Ms. Cruz?
Yes.
Mr. Edmonds?
Yes.
Mr. Gottlieb?
Yes.
Motion passes. Okay, we're ready to move on to other business. Agenda item 6, public comment. This is for items on the current agenda. Is there anyone in the audience who wants to speak to an item on this current agenda? Seeing no one, we'll go to number 7, Planning Commission comments. Let's start with Ms. Cruz this evening.
I don't really have any comments to share this evening. Thank you.
Mr. Gottlieb?
The only comment would be that there were a lot of questions that I had that I think would have been really, this would have resolved itself much quicker had the individual been here to share that, so that's the only comment.
Mr. Shepke?
Yeah, these cuts on the architectural part of the buildings, there was different things I would like to address the applicant about. I really don't like the layout. And the third story also is going to be a little imposing upon the neighbors behind them, so that bothers me a little bit. So I think if the applicant's here, it would make it a lot easier for us to make a good decision on this. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Nothing for me.
Mr. Hudson?
I've always believed that if a developer or an applicant really believed in this project, he would be at a meeting regardless of whether it was study or a formal hearing, and I'm disappointed that they're not here.
Statement.
No comment.
Mr. Stratt?
Comment.
No comment.
Sabadat?
I have a comment. The Michigan Association of Planning Annual Conference is upcoming. And this year, the conference will be in on Mackinac Island, October 8th, 9th, and 10th. So think about if you're interested or not. If you need more details from me, the agenda is out, the courses are out. For returning Planning Commission members, it's very valuable as a learning tool. For new members, there's some courses available. I think Mr. Shepke went on it last year in terms of a learning opportunity. It's very, very helpful, very informative, and you learn a lot. So I encourage Planning Commission members to consider attending, especially the newer members. And if you have any questions, please email or call or drop by and we'll talk.
Mr. Carlisle?
No comment.
With regard to Mr. Sabadan's recommendation about the Michigan Association of Planning, this is it's one of the unique opportunities that I remember when I first came on to take all the 7 core courses of the Michigan Citizen Planner. You can complete all of those within 3 days, and the ideal situation is that you take them with other similar people, other planning commission and members like that. So there's a dialogue, and it really is a wonderful learning experience. And it's rare that they would come here to Troy to do that for us. So I would certainly recommend that we do that, that you all take advantages of it. With regard to that, yeah, Mr. Sabadan, I wanted to ask one question.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Where are we at with our budget? Is there enough?
Oddly enough, I was going to comment on the budget. I haven't run the numbers in terms of the cost of a typical session. It varies year to year depending on the venue. Mackinac Island tends to be an expensive venue. I was talking to a fellow planner today, and he told me that his estimated cost for attending would be over $1,000. So I need to check. I can kind of run some numbers. If that's the case, we're not going to be able to have 100% attendance by Planning Commission members. Now, there's never been a situation where every Planning Commission member was willing and able to go to the conference, so I don't know if that's going to be an issue, but that's why I wanted to, kind of gauge interest in terms of if there's even going to be an issue or not in terms of who wants to go. So maybe within by next meeting, we'll take a roll call, a poll, and see who's interested in going, and then we'll take it from there.
If there's no further comments or concerns, we are adjourned.
You good?